versus 30. Worse, more severe droughts, that goes up to 9 billion. If you have not quite severe, it's only 40% proration, it drops to 6 billion. But what you do when you're an analyst, going at this, right, is you do a regression line when you see data like that, okay? And if you really want to be geeky, here's those 3 data points. And then I said, well, let's use a regression line. That's the slope of the line. If an R squared of 96% means you're bingoing that. There's no doubt you've got the right line, right? And then I said, well, what happens when it's 50% proration, not 20 or 30 or 40? And that number there starts to drop down into the $450 million range, not $800 million range. Okay, so I did that. And what you really get at is that their own data contradicts what they think they want to do from the hydrological and economic analysis, and they refuse to change it. Okay? And let me paint the whole picture for you, right? So at the end of this, the real benefits of the whole Yakima Basin Integrated Plan, all 3 projects, is $250 million. And because the current analysis says it's worth $768 million. But you've got to reduce that number because they've overstated the severity of droughts and the frequency of droughts, which gives that a $500 million reduction in the benefits. Just straight math. Right? Which means we're down to $253 million, and they're talking about spending $350 million just for the Kachess project. That $250 has to pay bumping, Weimer, Cleone, all those other things.
While at the same time maintaining the fiction that the water is actually available.
Correct. So, and then what does that leave you is, now if you just look at Kachess, right? In this $768 million, Kachess was $264 million of the benefit. But when you go through these haircuts, it drops to $87 million is the maximum benefit from their own data for that project. They're talking about spending $200 million on it, and they're happy because the farmers are going to pay a bunch of it. It's a dumb project. Our public policy is not supported in this kind of project. The principles and guidelines are violated by this kind of project. But because these people feel the political energy is to make this happen, everybody's looking the other way. And they just hope I'm not showing up on their doorstep. And it isn't me, it's just the truth. That's really what we're doing here. Okay, so is the data also accurate? Here's the other thing. You hear about return flow. Who knows what return flow is? So when you drop water upstream from downstream, it drains through the whole aquifer and eventually ends back up in the stream. When you look at, for the KDRPP project, they say you're going to have about 450,000 acre-feet of water delivered during drought years. Okay, but when you actually look at the water coming out of the lake, it's only 300,000 acre-feet. So there's an extra 150,000 acre-feet coming from somewhere, and the answer is return flow. So I say to them, okay, well, 52% more water than you're actually releasing. I get the concept of return flow, but you sure better rewrite, because that's more water that the farmers downstream are expecting to get, that if it's not there, it's an oops. Right? So then they just released a new technical memorandum, and we had the Kennewick Irrigation District people at the meeting in Union Gap, because their big problem is literally all of Kennewick's water is return flow. Right? And they've been saying for years, we think your calculation's wrong. We just don't get that much water. And lo and behold, in the new release technical data, after Kennewick's kind of hammered them, they said, well, we did a very detailed analysis of the return flows for Kennewick. And you know what we need to do? We need to drop that number by 25,000 acre-feet. Because you don't get it. Which they already knew, but now they're going to have to admit, right? And they say things like, the water returns more slowly, right? And by the way, Rosa doesn't really like return flow because that's water still on their property they might be able to get, so they're digging recovery wells and pumping the return flow back up and back into their farms. So they're going to take even less because of the stuff Rosa's doing. Right? And again, this is all about accuracy. These reports should just come right out in front and say it's 52%, and here's the analysis and why that's legit. But no one gets down and challenges these assumptions at that level. Okay? The other thing they did in phase 3 is, and remember I said operational updates. So they said, we don't like the historical data because the way we manage water has changed. So we're going to use a regression formula to update the historical water that we don't know whether we got it or not. We could measure it, but we're going to do a different answer in there. So the engineering firm who's been hired and paid millions of dollars decided to calculate the local flows using a regression rather than the actual data. That usually gets my analyst attention when I see stuff like that, right? And then we have these conservation programs, which I get. I mean, if you're going to do conservation, it changes it. But then you see stuff like this. Some of these projects may be outdated, but they were included anyway, whether they're going to happen or not. I think that's alternate facts. Okay? And then the net effect of these changes is, because they could do regression, because they could assert projects that may or may not happen are going to be modeled, they increased deliveries to the irrigation districts by nearly 1 million acre-feet. I don't know where it came from, but that got us 1 million extra feet, so you should be excited, right? And by the way, you NIMBYs up there, I just reduced the 900 by almost 1 million feet how much water I'm taking out of your lake. Now this is new math, right? Where you get to give 1 million more and take 1 million away and you call it all good. And I say to the Bureau of Rec and Ecology, you have to explain this. That's way past acceptable to just put those kind of numbers in there, because what it basically says is, farmers, you get a lot more money or water, and everyone in this room, you get a lot more water, and everybody's good. That's what we're up against, okay? We need to better understand these assumptions. But what happens is they're buried in 800-page reports, and I don't think anyone but me is reading them. I know more about it than some of the people at Bureau of Rec, because I actually read the whole report. And that's discouraging. These should be the experts. They're the public servants there to protect our interests. And yes, take care of the farmers, but you don't do that by ignoring half that equation. And then we get to what happens to the lake, right? And I already shared with you. If an adverse kind of scenario, the lake never recovers and the farmers get no benefit, right? And the pool never recovers. In only 6 years out of 31 does it even get above 50,000 acre-feet, which is the doomsday level today. They almost never take it there, right? And the pumps are running all the time. So quality of life is, and I'm closer to the pumps than you will be here, but I'm elevated a little more and a little further off the lake, so maybe you got it worse than I do, but I'm sure I'm going to hear them. All right, so that's at a very high level what I've been digging on. And the challenge is, what do we do with this? Because I've been hammering the Bureau of Rec, I've been hammering ecology, and the answers I get is, thank you very much, I can't really ignore you because I got the staffer of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee that committed to us that we would be heard. So every time they stop listening, I copy her on stuff, and then all of a sudden we get another meeting. Right? But it's kind of a full-time job. I got 5 kids, I gotta make some money too. So anyway, next steps. We need to continue to review these documents. But probably more importantly, we need third-party peer review. Because HDR is an interested party. Bureau of Rec wants these projects to happen. Department of Ecology, the governor has said, make this happen. They live in these communities. They don't want to be the person to go tell their friends and their neighbors and the people that sit next to them at church and that they shop next to that I shot your project. And I get that. I don't blame them for that. But there is a complete absence of objective, credible peer review. And when the legislature asked for it, and they asked Dr. Yoder at Wazoo to produce that peer review, it was decimating of this plan. And you know what they did? They ignored it. Okay? And we need to do it for the hydrology and the economics and the fish recovery. No one said a thing in this thing about what happens when there's a drought and the water goes above 70 degrees, because salmon can't live in water above 70 degrees. And you look at what happened in 2015 and the absolute decimation of the salmon flock coming back up, because the water was too hot. It's nowhere in there. And remember, we've got droughts 30 out of every 100 years. There's a severe drought at 30%. Last year it was at 47%. So a materially worse drought, no modeling for water temperatures, and impact on fish recovery. And there are huge community impacts, right? I respect the farming communities and how hard they work, and they've been doing generations. It doesn't mean we should do stupid public policy. We still need to solve those problems, though, okay? And we got to explore a more collaborative and creative way, which this process has not been collaborative. It has not been creative. It's been power football right up over the middle, and they got a lot of big guys. And they got a 5-year head start, and they get $30 million a year to make it stick. And we're out there fighting with our little sticks, right? So, but we need a better way to do it, and we need to problem solve around this idea of water strategy versus water storage. We need to use the water at its highest and best use. Hydrology experts would say, all the cheap water's gone. We already built those dams. So you're down to just really expensive water. Over in Wenatchee, they're talking about the Icicle Creek project. Similar MO, just as expensive. There's no more cheap water. So that's it at a high level. For this group, really what we need to do is, this supplemental EIS needs to be just a call to battle. And it's not a fair fight. I mean, we get to put in a bunch of comments, and they're supposed to respond to the comments. Right? I want to stop the process before they ever get there and say, you need to fix some of these fundamental flaws. Not treat it as a, we'll deal with that later situation. Right? DC's a gridlock. The energy bill, literally the same bill, got passed out of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. They're not acting on any legislation back there in any kind of way, so I don't really know what's going on in D.C. Senator Cantwell has a very influential position on this. Yeah, her partner in that is Senator Murkowski, but Senator Murkowski voted against the health reform package, so I don't know how much clout she has or doesn't have to get stuff done. So it's very complicated back there, right? Which means our real fight's in Olympia. Because they're the ones funding it. They're telling ecology what to do. The capital budget, thank God that didn't pass, and I don't really mean that, but it certainly put just dead in the tracks some of the projects they need to complete to move this project forward. The water subcommittee has just stopped meeting because there's no reason to meet because there's no money to do anything. Okay? And we need to be ready for doing that, which means we've got to really focus on talking to our representatives in Olympia and local government as well about water strategy versus storage. And the inconvenient truth for us here is, in the second year of a drought, there's huge damage to those farmers. There's just no avoiding that. When they lose crops, apple trees die, that's a huge dislocation of communities. And we might have to be part of that solution. I'm personally okay with that. But I'm not okay with just letting it be if it isn't that severe situation. And there may be others, and it's fine to say I'm not okay with that at any point in time. That's okay. But if we walk into this not expecting the need to compromise or understand how it affects other communities, really, when we get to the real facts, we're not going to represent ourselves very well because we're not listening in that moment. And everyone will need to draw their conclusion. But as the HOAs, we're going to need to activate. We're going to have a much louder voice in these things than we've had in the past. And while I don't expect to get the Yakima and even the Ellensburg kind of legislative representatives to listen to us, a lot of us live elsewhere, and those folks need to know this is an important issue for us. And I have a couple friends who are in the legislature, and the farmers are very well represented in Olympia. Right? And they're cutting deals on water with the Centralia folks who have flood problems, and they're trying to package all this water stuff into one giant problem and go against the Seattle liberal legislators and force them to kind of cut some deals. And the Yakima plan is on the table when those deals are getting cut. Because Senator Honeyford's very capable, very experienced guy, and he knows how to do that stuff. And knows how to package those things to get them done. And I'm not criticizing him, he's skilled. But the only way to fight that is to have equally skilled and equally motivated legislators that represent our interests to bring some balance to that discussion. 53 minutes. Done. All right, questions?
So clearly, I'm a little confused. So it sounds like that the truth is for the farmers that there's actually not a lot of benefit to them at the end of the day after all. And if that's the case, who's pushing this forward? Where's the political entity? Is there some group of people who are actually going to win because everyone else is paying?
I think the historical norm is agriculture pushes, the Fed government, the state government ends up coming up with money. So they push and get other people's money to fund these things. That's the history for sure. Now there's talk of saying, well, the farmers got to fund it, but Washington says they're going to fund 50% of it, and then they're going to use some screwy financing apparently to do it. And then it turns into, well, why do some private individuals who just happen to be part of an irrigation district get to take water from a bunch of other private individuals, and you get into this really weird dynamic when the federal government says, well, as long as you're willing to pay for it, I'm okay with that. That's a very weird position. And part of the challenge here is, at the federal level, what really gets a lot of attention, and it should, is the rights of the native tribes. And they've never seen a native tribe come walking in with farmers and say, we want to work together. And that's actually a really important thing to recognize, and I'm not opposed to it. But it's a little bit of a deal with the devil, where everybody's at the tables getting a piece of something, and we're the ones paying for it all. Both in terms of our lake here, but in terms of being taxpayers too. So, and the politics isn't my expertise. I've kind of learned a lot about it, but you got some real pros that know how to get things done. And you got motivated communities in Yakima and Ellensburg. You got Senator Cantwell, who runs for re-election next year, and traditionally a right-leaning conservative out of the east side of the state, so big risk to someone like Cantwell, so she's trying to manage that optic as well.
Jay, can I make a comment too? The Yakima Basin Integrated Plan was set up by a bunch of groups that were fighting, including the Yakima Nation and the irrigators and so forth, and they all agreed to work together, and they all came up with goodies that they wanted. So the Yakima Nation wanted fish passage, the irrigators wanted more water, the community groups wanted the Tianaway Community Forest. So a lot of the conservative groups wanted that, and they all agreed to work together, and part of the agreement was they would be in lockstep. So that once these things happened, like the Tianaway Community Forest went through the legislature, and the fish passage is coming to Cleveland, that they would not disagree. They would be in lockstep, they couldn't say no. So the irrigators are still waiting for their piece, which is
I've met like
pumping stations.
Forterra, the old Cascade Land Conservancy. They own 6 parcels over there next to me. And so they're property owners on the lake. But the commitment to get the $100 million to buy the Tianaway Community Forest is that Forterra and the Nature Conservancy would not criticize the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan. And I have sat in their offices talking to the president of Forterra, and they said, well, we just don't see Kachess to be a big enough issue to warrant, being against that. And we got the community forest already, right? And Honeyford built into the Tianaway Community Forest legislation that if they don't deliver 200 and, what was it? 200,000 from Kachess basically, and 14 or something. It's 14 because that's how much the Cleveland pool raised. I mean, it's this really weird number that says you have to do the Kachess project and you have to do the Cleveland pool raise. And if you don't generate that additional storage in 2025, the Tianaway Community Forest could regress back to private ownership. Could. That's the poison pill. But that's in the legislation, and that's kind of the operating MO that's out there right now. And I don't, this is where I don't know this, I'm not an expert, I've seen the language, but I don't know exactly what it means. It's kind of an attorney exercise. But we're up against very capable people. And I don't call them unethical, I call them good operators, right? And if we aren't equally organized and equally compelling and equally good operators, you're going to get beat.
Yeah, Jay, you've done an awesome job.
Thanks.
The data is really convincing. And what kind of thoughts does the group have in evangelizing this and pushing this out? I mean, any rational person seeing this data, you would think it would make some kind of impact.
Yeah, if I had a $30 million a year budget, I could probably do some damage with it, right? It's very complex stuff. It's very nuanced. And if you really want to make this kind of story come to life, you got to bring some professionals who do more than just the analysis into the mix about how you build PR, and you have to have traction with political leaders and media leaders, and we've tried to do some of those things, but we're just kind of a little too fragmented and undergunned, if you will, to really generate the momentum you need to come against that. Tom?
I think that's true, but on the other hand, you know, I got a flyer from Christine Johnson, who went to the campground here last weekend, and took, you know, 2 paragraphs worth of information, a summary of your report here, and used it as a way to begin conversations with campers. And she could tell us more about it than I can, but because she was there, I was not. But you know, I think that given the politics that are here, it seems like our only hope is to begin to educate the public. I mean, this is very compelling, but you know, there are hundreds of campers at the lake campground every weekend. And, you know, if we were down there, if there were 3 or 4 of us down there every weekend, starting next spring, we may have a big impact. Because, you know, if I go out and talk to people about this, nobody that I know, anywhere, whether I'm even in the eastern part of the state, if they're not farmers, if they're not part of this, they don't even know about this. You know, so somehow we need to raise.
Yeah, and the other constituency it's hard to give a voice to is the farmers themselves. There's a code of silence in this.
Well, I think
And
that's
even if
right.
you don't like it, speaking up in your own community comes at a very high cost. And I get that. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying you have to have a very powerful minority and a courageous one to stand up inside your own community and be against this.
Yeah, Jay, I was too, we were over at the Ellensburg Fair, and they had a big table with, I mean, they must have had good $10,000 or $20,000 just in production.
Oh yeah, they're good.
On every kind of brochure you can think of, looking at it from every angle. I mean,
Except for this one.
I mean, it was really professional. It almost feels like we should have.
Well, they got videos, and I mean, they got $30 million a year, and they've got a bunch of consultants all around it. So I'm not critical of them. I think they execute pretty well.
It almost feels like we should have a big billboard coming into the campground, you know, save the lake, with somebody on a little table out there handing out brochures and educating people.
So let me explain to you one of the challenges that we have, and one of the action items we're going to ask you all you folks to do right away is the way this plan originally worked. By mandate, the state was going to pay 50% of the cost of this project, and the federal government was going to pay the other 50%. For whatever reason, the federal government, some of the people in the federal government, I think, became a little bit gun-shy of the math behind this project. And so what eventually evolved now, as of our meeting in Union Gap, was the manager of Rosa Irrigation District stood up and said, you guys don't have to worry about taxpayers paying and the federal government paying any of this stuff. Rosa Irrigation farmers are going to pay 100% of the cost. And so I met with him during one of the breaks in the hallway and said, you know, you guys tried to float this project. Remember a few years back, the emergency pumping plant they were going to put at the end of the lake? The cost of that was $85 million. In December 15th, at their board meeting in Union Gap, the farmers lined that room, and I mean, I've never seen so many angry farmers in one place at one time, ever.
Right.
They had no clue what their district had signed them up for, and they all made it very clear there was no way in the world we're going to pay $85 million for a pumping plant, because that would put us out of business. Almost all of them would lose their small businesses and their small farms that had been in their families for generations. So then the question becomes, how are they going to pay $200 million? Well, I was assured by the manager of the Rosa Irrigation District that they're going to pay this, that they're up for it. I said, they know about this. And he says, oh yeah, they know about it. So they went back and I demanded for copies of all their meeting minutes from all of their board meetings. And there's no announcement in there, any of the board meetings that says they're going to pay $200 million. Instead, they hired a consultant to go and understand how they could finance this project. So we have a list of farmers, and the real way to stop this, one of the ways to stop this is to have the people who are being asked to pay for it are going to lose their family farms to stand up and tell Rosa Irrigation District no, to stop this thing. So we have a list of some of those farmers, and we've contacted some of them. They have no clue what's going on with this project and what they've been committed to. But on a broader scale, we talk about trying to get the message out to a whole bunch of people. I called Seattle Times and I said, I'd like to put a half-a-page ad in the Seattle Times advertising this project and all the negative aspects of this project. How much will that cost? And they said, well, about $10,000, but you need to get editorial approval. What would this ad say? And so I gave them a feel for what it would say, and at the time, this was about a year and a half, 2 years ago, they came back and they said, we're not sure we want to do that. I contacted them again after that meeting in Union Gap, and they said, well, it takes editorial approval from the Seattle Times as well as the New York Times, and we know we don't want to do that now. So they will not allow us to put a half-page ad in the Seattle Times advertising what this project is going to do. So you can begin to understand how strong the politics are behind some of this stuff. So we don't have $30 million a year to fight this. And by the way, they're using our money. So that's why we want you folks to contact your legislatures and say, look, you're spending my money, my tax money, to put this project forward, and it doesn't make any sense. I want you to stop spending my money. If this is really going to benefit the Rosa Irrigation farmers, and they're the ones paying for this, let them put the $30 million forward a year to do the research on this project. Why am I doing it as a taxpayer when it's going to benefit a small group of private businesses in the Rosa Irrigation District? So we have to bring that truth to light, especially in light of all the budget deficits that are going on in Olympia right now, with the undereducation of school and everything else, the underfunding of the schools. We have to let them know that stop this. You just have to stop this. This is nonsense. They stated publicly they're paying for it. Make them pay the bill for the advertising and the research on this project, not the taxpayers.